We're going to speak about, I will be speaking about the gravitational forces ultimately via video recording. But I will just say, as a presupposition, preliminary to those discussions with regards to gravity, that the gravitational forces lie within the interiors, the recursive interiors. These gravitational ranges or forces, as stated in theoretical physics and physics, they're not these gravitational forces, or this gravitational phenomenon of gravity is not described nor mathematically deduced from or at the surfaces. All gravitational variables, potentials, weakness, strong, all of that, as well as the very concept of gravity, is defined via recursion. I'll be discussing that later on. So at this point, if we're realizing that entanglement can be expressed in the abstract terms that I'm showing, and although they are abstract terms and abstract explanations, if you listen to the explanations and compare it to the model itself by looking at this model of two mirrors facing each other with recursion, then you'll see that the mathematics is consistent with all the terms and abstract descriptions that I'm providing. But we do see that entanglement can be further extended so as to describe or encompass alternate realities or universes, as I've stated earlier. And this entanglement and these alternate points as related to each other is not just confined to a cosmological framework or spectrum or mindset. These entanglements and these alternate realities and the ability for information to exist at many points simultaneously goes all the way down. It runs the rampant throughout everything that we experience in human life. Nature, genetics, everything is expressing these principles. So we can imagine, if we put it into the context of black holes, we can imagine that if two black holes are linked as to information due to existing on M surfaces or on the surfaces of the black holes, then this would express that two alternate versions of the same quantum information exist. We have a black hole here defined as a body of information existing on an M surface. We have a black hole here facing it relative to the surface of this one that itself has information, and that's linked to the information on the opposing black hole surface. So this basically expresses that there's two alternate versions of the same quantum information that exists between. Two alternate versions on both mirrors of the same object that exists in between. And of course we're seeing that because they're separate from each other, perhaps in the cosmic sense, separated by vast distances that even eclipse the speed of light, these two alternate versions or two alternate universes are expressed due to the entanglement of two black hole surfaces. So we're seeing a duality of an M surface to an M surface. This duality of reflected universes bespeaks that right now we started out speaking of an isolated mirror that no recursion can occur. Then we introduced the uncertainty principle, which allowed two mirrors to come into relativity to each other, and therefore recursion began. And we've also spoke about the potential for this, or the uncertainty of whether or not they'll remain in relativity, and if they lose that, then all recursive information ceases to exist. So we've basically confined the discussion up to this point to either one isolated mirror separate from another mirror, and then we've introduced the Heisenberg principle, which states two mirrors relative to each other. But we can extend this even further, and this is where the model just begins to expand exponentially. Imagine that we have myriads of mirrors facing each other from all different directions and all different angles and distances. Imagine we have a myriad of M fields or reflective surfaces reflecting off of each other. Then actually we could expand our understanding of alternate universes and actually go into the realm of describing an enormous enormous, mind-boggling landscape of possible universes, all attached to each other. So the recursive matrix, and I'm not going to refer to matrices right now. Let's just refer to one side of the equation, one side of the entanglement. The recursive matrix represents the structure of space-time. But we have to realize matrices necessarily, due to the uncertainty to certainty principles I discussed above or in other videos, is showing the difference between an isolated field versus entangled fields. So if we have an M field, one mirror is isolated, there is a potential for it to become entangled with another M field if that proximity or that relativity occurs. And if after two fields become entangled, then there is now the potential to lose entanglement and therefore return back to just a state of an uncertainty principle. So there's no real structure existing on the M surfaces. Again, we've described a zero-dimensional body of information being projected and implanted to the surface of an M surface, just the manifold itself, and that produces a one-dimensional image. No depth, no three dimensions. So in that sense, on the surface, there is no what we could refer to as structure, no three-dimensional framework occurring on the surfaces. All the three-dimensional aspects, and again, we could actually equate the three-dimensional aspects by nature as the dynamical aspects. And we'll be speaking about inertia, gravity, ranges and forces of gravity, entropic forces, phase space. All of these things will be drawn into the discussion. But all three-dimensional aspects or structure or implied structure that we see, they're not derived from one isolated mirror. They're derived from the entanglement or the M to M relativity. So in essence, this is would be expressed as R asterisk times asterisk R equals recursion. And remember, the recursive symbol is an R in between two asterisks. So the structure is confined to the recursive functions, or the matrices, the interiors, the virtual interiors of the black hole. And they're not defined as any structure, dimension, proportion, etc. existing on the one-dimensional surface of the planes. This shows the distinction between the volume of information just merely reflected to a surface with a virtual timeline that creates depth and dimension, not to mention that it's incrementally separated by membranes that move in relationship to each other. All of those higher dimensional, three-dimensional aspects, or the structure of space-time, the fabric of space-time, emerges due to the relativity of two reflective surfaces, the relativity of two black hole bodies of information. Let me check my time. So here I'm describing the whole string as representing two beginning locations, 2 points, the surfaces, on the right. So on the right there's a beginning of a string that turns out to be a recursive virtual arrow of time, space-time continuum, and it's the surface of the mirror that births that potential recursive. Same is true on the left side. Right and left, same. So these two closed points of strings that are entangled, so they're part of the same reflective string, are divided by the open part of the string. Though the open part of the string is described as the distance from the real object to either or side of the string. Points, beginnings of strings with a corresponding and accompanying virtual extension of the string infinitely. So as well, the information exists in the open part of the string, and it's reflected to all points, whether on the surface or recursively represented. However, though the string is considered to be open where the higher dimensional information resides, i.e. quantum information, this information from the quantum point is reflected to both locations of the strings, first at their surfaces, and then the information of the string or system is continued, and not really broken per se, just by mere fact that there's an open space between the mirrors. And we're going to get into recursion as describing the supersymmetric system, the supersymmetric aspects of these relationships that I'm describing in another video.